Welcome to the Chiefs. The Chiefs is a Whiteark podcast aimed at specifically giving you an insight into what makes great leaders and entrepreneurs in a variety of organisations tick. We call them Chiefs. My name is James Ciuffetelli, and together with my Whiteark co-chief, Joe Hands, we're going to attempt to take you on a journey and talk to as many chiefs across as many industries as we can to give you an insight into A, what makes them tick, and B, what makes their enterprises thrive, and more importantly, what they've learnt along the way. The Chiefs. Welcome, guys. This week I'm so excited to be joined by John Ieraci, the Chief Customer Officer at Telstra Enterprise, Andrea Khoury, the Managing Director of Aussie Services and Maintenance, and Andrea Petrocco, the Victorian President and Australian Insurance Law. We're going to talk about all things related to COVID, what their organisations and customers experienced on the way in, and how they're managing it now to this new normal. Today's an opportunity for all of us to engage three fantastic guests and to actually gain some learnings and insights around this pandemic that we're living through right now. So in today's session, our intention is to talk through the impact of COVID on three really different business settings and industry, and really gain three fantastic perspectives on the early days through the pandemic, some of the transition, and where these three business and industry leaders are at with their respective businesses. We all know that it's fast forward so many unexpected variables, crisis management plans that did or didn't work, or did or didn't exist. And it really threw us all into the deep end of how to handle these things. So many companies, big and small, had developed crisis management plans, but COVID came along and we just had to find our way through it. So it's going to be really interesting to see how three different organizations did that. And from all of our perspectives, how some of these organisations were able to tackle some of these challenges and how they navigated, but more importantly, where they're at now and how they're forward-facing into what is our new world. Without further ado, I might start with you, John, from a Telstra perspective. If I asked you to cast your mind back to mid-March, early March, was probably even prior to that, this COVID pandemic hit, what did you observe through your business or through your clients? And talk us through some of those initial days.
No worries. Thanks, James. So I remember it very, very clearly. And for those of you in Australia, you might have recalled, I think Telstra was the first enterprise organisation to really mobilise a work from home workforce during the COVID period. So we've been sort of monitoring in early March, we were monitoring the sort of COVID situation. We've got a global business, we've got people in Hong Kong and so forth. And our CEO leadership team and our crisis management team, you described, implementing crisis management functions, Jamie. We're very well versed and we have a very strong crisis management team and operating model because of bushfires and floods and so forth. So, before most of Australia actually went to a work from home environment, we took the choice to go early and mobilise our teams because we felt that there was going to be a bow wave of activity, particularly from a telecommunications perspective, to underpin the nation should the country go to a work from home situation. So we pretty much anticipated where, the puck was going, and we literally, over the course of a weekend, moved 25,000 staff from working in the office to home. That was actually a relatively seamless transition for Telstra, and that's for a couple of reasons. We've actually had a flexible working policy in place for about 2 or 3 years, and that sort of covers the technology, having technology at home that people can use to connect to the office. We also have HR policies in place around making sure you've got the right occupational health and safety capabilities at home. We enable our staff to order chairs and monitors and so forth to be able for them to work from home. So the transition for us was quite seamless over that weekend period. It actually got a little bit more interesting in the weeks that followed. And if I touch on those, few weeks, what we then saw happen was the rest of Australia moving to a work from home scenario. And therefore we became really, really busy in enabling a lot of enterprise organisations to build either capacity for video conferencing services or working from home and getting the technologies up and running. That happened during a period where India and the Philippines also went into a work from home situation. And for any organisation that has a big contact centre or an offshore facility, you'll know what a nightmare that is. In essence, it means if you can't get your staff into a contact centre facility in one of those offshore locations, you have privacy issues. In essence, we can't bring electronic goods into contact centre environments. So in essence, we, along with most of the large corporate Australians, lost all of our contact centre agents in offshore locations. And what that really did was drive a huge amount of activity around building out, I'll say, virtual contact center agents, being able to work from home, particularly onshore. We had to mobilise a huge number of staff across our organisation and contractors to work in a contact centre environment that wasn't in a physical facility, so cloud-based contact centres and virtual contact centres. We literally sought out staff that were prepared to go on the phones, and we got all the graduates across Telstra, trained them up, put them onto a contact centre facility so that we could service our customers. And then the weeks that pursued, we really focused on digitally enabling our channels with our customers. So we've got two key applications. One's the 24/7 app, which is our consumer application, and that's how you can sort of order your phone service and pay for your bills. And we've got Telstra Connect in the enterprise organisation. What we saw play out over the months of, it was just after Easter actually, was a huge amount of digital adoption from our customers. We went from about 5% digital engagement with our tools to 55%. Our sales channel, which was over the last 2 years, moving from about an 8% to a 27% via digital channel enablement with our consumer business to 55% now. So, the story here is the transition for us to work from home wasn't the challenge. Contact centre agents and having offshore facilities was a big challenge. And we had to move very, very quickly to a digital model with our customers. Fortunately, we'd invested in those capabilities over the last few years. So we were able to rapidly make that pivot. In my customer-facing role, the observation I would make is there was really a split in the market between those organisations that had invested in digital capabilities, had those channels, were able to make those moves, versus those that hadn't. And those that hadn't literally had applications that weren't working because their networks either couldn't cope with the volume or they didn't have the right policies to enable their staff to be working from home, and they really were tripping over themselves in terms of just mobilising a workforce in a different way. So very split, from what I can see in the Australian landscape, between those more forward-thinking, progressive customers versus those that were operating in a traditional sense and really weren't prepared for something like this.
And we'll explore it in a few moments' time, John, but I think it's really interesting. I mean, you said that from your perspective, the business went from 5% digital engagement through chat and some of those mechanisms to 55% plus. But if you sort of roll forward to the insight that you've gleaned from your customers, so those who'd invested are probably seeing similar percentages. Those who hadn't, who are trying to sort of play catch up and transform on the fly, where are they at? Do you feel like they've made that inroad, or there's still quite a journey for many of them?
There's two parts to that answer, actually. So first of all, they're playing catch up and they're moving as quickly and rapidly as they can. But what's interesting is those customers that hadn't digitised, there's so many cloud services available now, things like Zoom, and who knew about Zoom 6-8 months ago? They're really going straight to cloud services. Whereas whilst we had customers that had digitised their environment, it was a bit of a hybrid environment. Some was cloud enabled, some was physical infrastructure that they had in their own environment. So we're finding those customers that hadn't digitised, rapidly moving, are really going to cloud-based applications that are quite simple to apply to their businesses. Those others that had digitised are now having to, I'll say, pivot their digital strategy because they're realising they didn't have the scalability and growth projections in what they built, and they're now trying to sort of move to cloud-based applications as well. So it's almost like those that hadn't are making the double leap, and those that had transformed are now making a pivot. So they're probably my two observations there, James.
Andrew, I'm going to ask the same question of you. So totally different industry and probably a couple of different perspectives. You could probably have three perspectives because you've got an insurance perspective, then obviously you're head of the board perspective, and then I know that, you've got a heavy involvement in various family businesses and what have you. Talk to us about your experiences, your industry, and some of the things that you saw.
Thanks, Jamie. Thanks, John. That was very interesting to hear Telstra's point, what they have completed since COVID hit everyone. Speaking from an AILA point of view, so that's the Australian Insurance Law Association, predominantly our membership base is law firms and or the insurance industry. So even prior to the government directives to work from home, many in the industry were being directed that they could go to work, but they couldn't do anything outside of the office. So that be attend meetings or actually attend events. So we had events planned that people actually couldn't attend. And we actually had presenters pull out because of their concerns that they didn't want to contract the virus because they were living with, elderly parents and didn't want to pass that on. So straight away we were impacted. Quite quickly, we needed to amend our ways to not only suit our members, but our committee, because our committee is very passionate about what they do. So straight away, our networking ceased and our collaboration ceased in a very personal manner, because when a lot of us are based off William Street in Melbourne and we bump into each other outside of the committee meetings, and that networking of, hey, let's have a coffee, let's discuss a webinar, let's do something, not a webinar, a seminar, I should say. All that contact, and it's something that we all thrive as humans to have that contact. So going directly to home, I think we all felt the impacts of that. We had to go from running face-to-face seminars and transition that to webinars. So whilst that might seem easy for some, we had to purchase the license. We had to have a crash course in how to operate it from a moderator's view as well. And we also had to provide our speakers, who were also new to the platform, adapt. So we had practice sessions prior to every seminar. So whilst, Jamie or, John, you might be a little bit more proficient in speaking and, doing it via a webinar, a lot of our presenters were quite comfortable standing at a podium and speaking, but putting them on a digital platform, it's that change in the way that you deliver your information. But what it did do, it did provide us with opportunities that we would not have been able to have before or experienced before. So an example would be, we held a seminar with the Chief Justice of the Federal Court, and we held that seminar webinar directly from his chambers. So that wouldn't have happened pre-COVID. We had an instance where I was organising a webinar in Victoria, and they were all Victorian panellists, but one couldn't attend because of COVID and childcare centre being closed. So she recommended a colleague in Queensland. So I was like, okay, well, I don't know this person. Jumped onto LinkedIn, said, hey, this is what we're doing. Are you interested? Within 30 minutes, it was done. So if we had subject matter experts that we wanted to come to a seminar, previously pre-COVID, we would have to have, flown them down and incurred that expense. So the functionality of the webinar enabled us to extend our options naturally, whereas previously we were very constricted. So it actually, with COVID, it opened up possibilities for us.
And I think that's really interesting. And one of the questions we were going to touch on earlier, but we might as well ask it now, is I think about ourselves and a lot of people on the call, we quite enjoy the junkets to LA and what have you, and the various conferences,
definitely.
whatever. You can see the Telstra guy in the corner going, they're not junkets, they're really serious meetings. But anyway, but do you think that's changed forever? So if you use that Chief Justice example, where you actually got a webinar with the Chief Justice from his or her chambers, do you think this has changed? Will seminars go back to what they were?
I think the one thing that we did find, and only recently, November, September, October, we experienced webinar fatigue. So a lot of people were getting sick of paying the $30, whereas previously we were charging $80 for a seminar, and over lunch, an hour, or 5 o'clock at night, because we offered the seminar, but also afterwards we offered that networking opportunity. And you don't have that with a webinar. So with the fatigue, we really had to look at our delivery. So with AILA and being a national body, previously we would just email out a flyer to all our members. Here's another webinar coming up. Here's this one. Here's that one. And we listen to our members, because they're like, enough. We're getting too many emails. And you've got to keep it relevant. So to keep it relevant in this environment, it was, quite a challenge. So we ended up changing the way we deliver our webinars and our advertising of webinars, because we directly listen to our members. I think when we move forward, we saw that Queensland was opening up, New South Wales was opening up, Victoria was still closed. So even if they could go ahead and do webinars, what we were doing was a lot of collaboration between the states on webinars. So we were getting experts like barristers in Victoria presenting on webinars, and getting their colleagues in Queensland and New South Wales to also jump on the webinar. So we had all these subject matter experts, which was just fantastic. But moving forward, how are we going to do that? Will we do that? Are we going to be able to, continue with that offering? And do people actually really want to go back to, oh, I've got to walk down Burke Street, I've got an hour to attend this seminar? Actually, can you just put it on a webinar because I can move 2 meetings around and I can attend?
It's a super interesting perspective, isn't it? Christina's just put forward a
Yeah.
view here, which I think is a really good perspective too. And she's one of the best behavioural professionals I know. But from her perspective, she said, I wonder whether there's been a distinct lack of learning on how to, from a webinar perspective, right? Because, I mean, so much of our world has been geared to the physical, right? So, you've kind of addressed
Yeah,
that
definitely.
through getting some of your barristers to partner up and learn from SMEs. But there's an opportunity there as well.
Definitely. We've all had to, I mean, I was a moderator on one webinar and I was like deer in headline. But if you get me in a room, I'm like, hi, how are you? Like, come on, let's hear. Have you met so and so? Have you met so and so? But in the webinar, you're looking at the little white dot that I'm looking at now. And I'm like, hello, how are you? So it's a whole different way of working. And a lot of our presenters were old school. So it was, we had a young networking event where we got all the best of the best in the insurance industry to come on a panel, and they were fantastic because they understand technology. But on the flip side, the Chief Justice of the Federal Court, he was very reserved and, he spoke very eloquently, but he didn't move a lot in his presentation. So it's both ends of the scale. And it's trying to find that medium that works.
There's a real personal development opportunity coming on. And one thing I do want to park is another point that was just put forward by Christina around people. And we're going to talk about the impact on our people, our staff, on our customers. And I want each of your perspective a little bit later on their mental health, on their fatigue. But obviously there's a learning and development opportunity as well. So thank you, Andrea. Andrew, you've been waiting quietly in the wing. And you know what, really interestingly, from your perspective, I mean, middle market Australia, SMB, national presence, a service business. I'd love your perspective on the early days from the field. I mean, you've got your operators and your employees out in the field. Talk us back to February, March there and some of what you saw and experienced.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thanks to the other panelists for your insights as well. Really interesting. Look, for us, around that time, obviously February, March, obviously learning about COVID and whatnot, we had to kind of understand, okay, so what are the most important things for us to pivot our business to make sure that, because for us, we're going into people's homes on a daily basis, people are going to feel uncomfortable knowing what they know now about COVID. Even the on-field staff, they're going into someone's home, but they might not know what they have. So it's from both, you have to kind of balance both ways. You have to make sure that your staff are safe. You have to make sure the customer is safe. So the first thing that we kind of implemented is obviously the COVID training. We had everyone jump online, complete the online COVID training. We then obviously posted it on our social channels, posted it on our website to kind of let the public know that, yes, we are aware of this. We are an essential service, so we still need to keep on operating. But however, we are aware of our obligations and we are COVID safe and we will continue to trade, but in a COVID safe way. And obviously making sure that our own staff are kept up to date with all the up-to-date COVID things in the market of what needs to be done in entering a customer's home. I mean, for us, it's all about common sense, I think, as well. Like, obviously, when you're going into someone's home, I call it their castle. You got to kind of tip your toe in the sense that they're obviously very paranoid about what's happening out there relating to COVID, and obviously how to approach them in a I guess, respectful manner. In some instances, we would walk into someone's home, we would quote the job. We would have to place the iPad down on the table. They would take a few steps back. The customer would review the quote. They would sign it, and then we would step forward and take the iPad back. But these are the times we live in where obviously we have to adapt to our surroundings, and if that makes the customer, I guess, comfortable, then so be it, right? Those things aren't as common at the moment. I think everyone's kind of a bit more relaxed compared to what it was in March. But you just need to adapt to what's happening around you at that specific time and just learn how to adapt to it.
And Andrew, one of the perspectives you put forward there is super interesting in as much as you guys are actually out in field going to service my home, for example. You've got an electrician, one of your franchisees coming in. Was there much trepidation there from consumers? So was the end customer basically saying, hey, we're not letting you in? Or did you see the phone stop ringing because they didn't want to, even though you're an essential service? And how did you overcome that? What operationally did you have to put in place to actually overcome that if that was in fact an issue?
Look, when the news of the first COVID wave was kind of coming about, we actually got a lot busier because people kind of thought we're going into a lockdown and I need all these things completed because I don't know how long this lockdown is going to last. So the uncertainty kind of raised a lot of, I guess, people were just like, I got to get these things done. I don't know how much longer this long lockdown is going to go. So we had a major influx of inquiries to get things done. Once that kind of first 2 or 3 weeks subsided, then I guess the kind of panic set in, where some customers were like, you know what, I don't really need to get it done now. I'll probably call you back in 3 to 4 weeks' time once I know exactly what's happening with this pandemic and what's the outcome going to be. Not all, but some people did have that kind of opinion. And obviously, we would obviously just give them a follow-up call in that 2 or 3 week time frame. And in most instances, we would just go out and service them then.
And Andrew, because you're a national business, I mean, Sydney, a lot of people on this call are from Melbourne. And obviously, we've had a really different COVID experience to you folk in Sydney. Did you notice a difference from a consumer perspective in Melbourne?
Absolutely. Chalk and cheese. So, I mean, obviously, Melbourne was more affected than Sydney. So, obviously, there was a lot more, I guess, concern in the market from a consumer point of view. So, the inquiries from a Melbourne's perspective were a lot less than Sydney, obviously during the same time frame. From our perspective, Melbourne was obviously impacted more than Sydney.
And I'll ask this question to everybody, but I'll start with you, Andrew, because I've got you now. So if you sort of think about your business today and where it's at now, and, you know, I know this COVID pandemic, we're still going through it. We will be for quite some time. Where would you say the biggest 2 or 3 impacts that you've had to pivot most predominantly? Like, I mean, has it had a big impact on cash flow? You've spoke a fair bit about your service approach, how you've had to pivot and introduce COVID-safe approaches and what have you. Have you had to shift your technology stack and what have you? Where are the biggest pivot from Aussie's perspective?
I think a few of those points that you touched on are true. So from a cash flow perspective, what we did was we weren't sure how this COVID, I guess, pandemic was going to affect our business long term. So I guess for us, we kind of had to be preemptive in that sense, where we got in contact with all our suppliers, whether it be, you know, through plumbing supplies, electrical supplies, marketing partners, and obviously just advise them, you know, in the event that this gets worse, can we push out payment terms? So everyone was really forthcoming with that, and everyone had a positive kind of response. Not that we had to use it, but it was obviously just being prepared in the event, getting yourselves, or get your ducks in a row. In terms of work coming through, I think I've spoken with you in the past about this, pushing the brand harder in the sense that trying to become more of a household name. People obviously need that kind of reassurance that whoever's coming into their home is a reputable brand, that they've done certain things to the procedures in place to make sure that the technicians going into their home have been COVID trained, not just someone who they found on Google as an example, who they don't know who they are, they don't have a background on them. So obviously becoming that household brand name in the market for that comfort, that reassurance that I know who's coming into my house is a professional, is licensed, is insured, is COVID safe, and is going to get the job done correctly.
It's a really interesting virtue that you touch on in terms of your marketing around trust, the whole Aussie brand, the brand you can trust, and really pushing in some of those COVID really important messaging to build that trust. Thank you, Andrew. I'm going to throw back to you quickly, John, if I can, and then I've got the same question for all of you. So we fast forward, here we are today. What are the 2 or 3 learnings for you, John, at Telstra? Did it have an impact on cash flow? I think about your role at Enterprise. There must have been businesses that were flying and then overnight fell apart. Like I think of the Ticketek business, and I think about some of the sportings and events businesses in the hospitality industry. Talk us through where it's at today and what are the 3 biggest pivots you've had to make?
Yes, I mean, it's a couple of questions in that. So first of all, in terms of the pivots that we've had to make, I think mentioned one of those, which is really about doubling down on our digitisation and the way we engage with our customers. So that will absolutely continue. To where you went, Andrew, yeah, we've got to have COVID-safe environment as well. So we've got a lot of field force, so we've got techos out in the street and so forth. So we've got a lot of digital applications now that are monitoring contact tracing, where we're going into customers' homes and so forth. So making sure that we've got a safe environment. And even our offices. So we talked earlier, just before this session kicked off, around what's the plans for big corporates to return to offices. So we've had to implement, or we are implementing, like a lot of the large enterprise organisations, a COVID-safe work environment where you need to book a desk before you actually come into the office. And we've actually developed for Telstra, that is what we're calling a digital twin, which replicates the office environment. So we can actually track how many people are in the office and use video analytics and so forth to make sure that we are sort of maintaining the right distancing and having the right densities and so forth.
What was that, John? A digital twin? Sorry, I just want to make sure I capture that. A digital twin?
Digital twin. So for those that have not heard the term before, digital twin is just basically a replication of a business process or a virtual model. So, you know, we have digital twins of buildings, what the building utilisation looks like. We have digital twins of production environments. Got a great example, sort of digressing for a moment, but a virtual asphalt producer. So Downer Construction, who create asphalt for roads and so forth, you can actually emulate their production environment in a virtual world. And what we're seeing, and I was about to go there as well, Jamie, is when we're engaging with customers, we're having far more conversations around how we can use data analytics and artificial intelligence to understand their working environments and how COVID might impact those environments. So we're sort of seeing, I'll just say broadly across the board, digitisation in many facets, whether that be the physical engagement. I have a business-to-business sales organisation, so how do we more effectively use Zoom, and how do we use things like virtual whiteboard and mural board? And to the points that you were raising earlier, Andrea, how do you keep an engaging conversation going with the customer when normally you would meet in an office room? So that's one dimension. The other dimension is helping our customers with their digital strategy, normally starting with how they engage with their customers. So what's their digital channel? What's their employee experience? But where I'm finding the conversations are going more and more, and this is a pivot we're seeing in the market and a pivot that we're making as well, is how are we supporting our customers to use digital technologies, both to optimize their operational functions, but in a COVID-safe way. And what I'm referring to there is, when you have a big manufacturing facility, how many people are coming into that facility? Can you sort of take some human element out in certain areas so that you're actually reducing the risk? So a lot of automation, robotics, those sorts of conversations, I think, are far more prevalent now than what they were 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, look, you had a sort of third part to your question is, what's your sort of key insight? The key insight that I always like to cite in these sorts of conversations is everyone thinks that technology has been the enabler here. The interesting thing is technology has actually always been there. So the fact that you can go from, the sort of percentages of digitization and adoption in such a short period means technology wasn't the barrier. It was actually the adoption of it and the human behavior. And Christina, if you're a psychologist here, then, it'd be really interesting for your perspective on this, which is necessity has driven people to look at really creative ways of operating. I mean, Andrew, you called it out. You pull the iPad out, somebody actually signs the iPad. It's no longer a piece of paper and so forth. So technology is here. In my mind, it's the mindset has shifted, but Absolutely. Then also what I think is going to be a really interesting area of focus over the next couple of years will be what I call human-centered design. So technology is great, but it needs to interface with humans. And, what you were saying, Andrea, if it doesn't feel humanistic, people won't embrace it. And I just look at something like, we're using Zoom today, but Teams, just having the hand up function on Teams, it's humanistic. To be able to sort of speak on a call like this and be able to put your hand up, that's a sort of a human-centered design function where people are thinking about how humans engage with technology in a human way. So look, they're the big sort of changes and shifts that I'm seeing, James.
Quite a number of really great questions coming through, but I'm going to throw to you, Andrea, and then we'll get on to the last part of our session before we open up and try and answer. I've got so many questions. Andrea, a question that came through before you actually talk us through your 2 or 3 focus areas to get to this point, or 2 or 3 learnings, is from Claire. And it says, if the AILA decides to operate events face-to-face again, how will you manage liability of managed contact tracing and privacy requirements about holding personal data and what have you? Don't have
Thanks,
to tell
Claire.
you. Sorry, Claire.
Well, it's very interesting because also I'm on the board for Mayflower, and one of the recommendations that came out of the Royal Commission interim report was exactly that, having these COVID-safe officers on site. And what it comes down to is who's going to be paying for that? Is that an expense we have to look at? Or if we go to a venue, is that an expense that the venue will have to do as part of their requirements to actually host event? I think with AILA, we would definitely have a COVID safe environment if we did go back to face. But I think the one thing that we all sort of need to really start doing, and I always laugh every time I see my pharmacist, he's Serbian, and every time you see him, he's like, hey, and he just wants to give you a hug, and you're like, oh, and we're like this, so with the foot, and we've got to get back into that practice. And I think if we start going face to face, definitely with lawyers or people in the industry, the insurance industry, there's a lot of close talkers. So it's, getting back to that distance. We would definitely look at doing it, but I think it would be privacy is the big one. I was having a conversation with a colleague the other day where I went into Specsavers just to buy a cleanser for my glasses, and the front of their desk was name, phone number, just sitting there. And what was me just to go up, take a photo, and I've got all these people's details. I just found that breach of privacy just astounding. But, how do we control that data? Like, what do we do with it? Do we keep it for a certain time? Do we destroy it? Do we hand it to someone? Like, what's the requirements on us? So there's a lot of challenges, and I think it does also open you up to a lot of risks as well. And we just got to have controls in place to assess those risks and follow those controls through to make sure that we don't breach anyone's privacy if they attend any of our events.
I think Claire's just put her hand up. She said she'll fund anything that needs to be funded in terms of legal obligations. Is that fair, Claire? Look, in terms of if we sort of fast track and sort of moving forward, lots of questions around the new COVID normal and what have you, which I find is quite interesting in its own right because it's just the new normal from my perspective. But David Thurkel has a question, and I'll use this to frame the future-facing question for the three of you. But I'm going to start with you, John. And the question is, do you think the rate of enabling technologies that you spoke about and each of you have spoken about will continue when the world comes up and says, hey, we're through COVID? Will we revert back, or do you think this is the new normal and this is actually the way that consumers are going to adopt what we put forward?
I firmly believe that the acceleration is just going to continue. So, what this has done is just open the eyes, I think, of a lot of people, whether they be in consumer or whether they be in enterprise, the art of what's possible through technology. So we're seeing just more and more adoption of these type of services. In terms of, just sort of looking to the future a little bit, because I think that's where you're sort of going with your question, James. We actually had Bernard Salt at a Telstra event recently. So for those of you who don't know who Bernard Salt is a futurist. He writes in the sort of the AFR and so forth. He's the person that coined the phrase, the smash avocado, if you all know that phrase. He actually came up with a new phrase recently when we hosted him on a sort of a customer call. And he talked about the pillification of Australia. And I said, what is the pillification of Australia? And he talked about everybody working in their home environments like we are, with the bedrooms in the background and the pillows, right? So the pillification is just by virtue of the fact that we're all sort of working sort of from home. What he's predicting is 60% of the workforce will not return to the office full time. So they'll work from home, 2 to 3 days a week. But what he's also predicting is what we're going to see more and more is more of a distribution of sort of the workforce and people working in different environments, and particularly people moving to, let's call it, the lifestyle sort of either states or suburbs. So people working in more of the urban environment. But what he believes to be the big shift sort of at a macro level will be more entrepreneurialism. So more entrepreneurs being able to be successful from working from home environments and running businesses. So to answer your question, James, I think the technology is going to continue to accelerate, but I think people's view of where they can work and what they can do and what they can achieve is going to fundamentally shift. And we're going to see that sort of play out over the next few years.
So from a Telstra perspective, especially from an enterprise perspective, how do you drive your focus forward? Because clearly from a digital transformation perspective, you're there. Where's your focus now sort of looking out for the next 6 months?
For our customers?
Yes.
Very simple. Always what we focus on for our customers is 3 fundamental business challenges: customer experience, employee experience, and optimizing their business processes and so forth. So if I break those 3 down, customer experience, how do we enable our customers to develop more of a digital engagement with their customers or the services they provide? Andrea, great example. Andrew, great example. What you talked about was digitally enabling your customers in a slightly different way, one with an iPad, one with webinars. So a lot of activity around just creating that digital engagement with their customers. Employee experience, it's really about how do you enable work from anywhere, mobile enabled, 5G, having the facilities like this, having collaboration tools that can work between different types of technologies and platforms, and doing it in a secure way is really important. So, developing solutions like on your home broadband, how do we actually carve out a corporate network so you can connect to the corporate network in your home environment? So that's sort of the employee experience. And then, as I said, the sort of business processes fundamentally around how do we create digital twins of certain environments, whether they be an office, whether they be a factory, whether they be any type of working environment. We can sort of support the digitisation of those functions and processes. So that's our sort of core focus. And I'll do a bit of a plug here. There's actually a...
He's going to pull the flag up.
Yeah.
I'll do a plug. We actually have a subsidiary or a capability that we've built called Telstra Purple, and Telstra Purple is a technology professional services company that actually does a lot of this transformation for our customers. My peer who leads that group was actually interviewed by Sky News yesterday, called Beyond COVID, and it'll interview a large number of sort of technology providers, but that show will actually talk about some of these technology shifts. So I'm sort of plugging the Sky News rather than the Telstra Purple piece, but I just thought, given the relevance of what we're talking about here, people on this call might be interested in it.
John, you let your peer know, and I'll let Sky News know that Whiteark has got a podcast called The Chiefs that you might hear about some of those learnings on that podcast.
Okay.
That's a great update. Thank you. Andrew, a really, really quick one from your perspective in terms of some of the strategies now moving forward for your business. Where do you put your priorities? And I'm also interested on how your staff are feeling, because I mean, they're at the front line, right? They're having to deal with the change. How are your staff feeling? Because there's a lot of questions coming through. I mean, what about our people? I mean, initially there was this sort of influx I loved going home initially. I thought it was fantastic, right? But now I actually want to engage people again. I want to engage my colleagues. I even want to hug some people, Andrea. There you go. So from your perspective, Andrew?
Initially, when the COVID pandemic kind of hit, there was definitely some unrest from the staff on the field. They don't know who they're going to meet. They don't know if that person has COVID-19, whether they do or don't. So obviously trying to manage that to get them to come to work and providing the training on what to do, wearing masks, hand sanitizers, keeping a social distance, implementing that into the business so that they could feel safe and confident coming to work. We touch on those points on a weekly basis. So everyone kind of knows what's required of them and how to be safe while coming to work. So I think from that perspective, we've done really well, but obviously just trying to remind them on what to do so they don't fall short and obviously something goes wrong. So from that aspect, that's what we kind of do, is just constant training. They will make them feel safe. In terms of the business moving forward, pushing that brand, as I mentioned to you before, pushing it really hard. So obviously via socials, through radio channels, direct mail, pushing the franchise brand to go nationwide. And that'll obviously help push the brand in itself by doing that.
What tools have helped you the most? And if you had to give advice to other operators of small businesses and medium-sized, what tools should they be investing in from a digital transformation perspective?
Yeah, so in terms of technology, iPads in all trucks. So obviously the guys don't have to use any type of paper type of invoicing or quoting, whatever that might be. Everything is synced via head office. So in terms of the scheduling systems, the quoting systems, the payment software, everything is bundled in. So obviously it makes their lives a lot easier when they're going out in the field. All they really need to concentrate on is providing a great service, implementing a great job. Everything from our end is tracked. So for example, we have a really granular tracking system where if a call comes in, say from Google, we'll know that call came into that particular job. And at the end of the month, we run our reports. And then we can see how much revenue did this particular advertising channel bring for the business? How much did this bring in? Was it profitable? Was it not? So things like that in terms of technology are very crucial for our business. So that way we know moving forward, what do we need to raise in terms of budget? What do we need to decrease in terms of budget?
Question that's just come through from one of our colleagues in Israel, Yosh. Do you believe we'll actually get to a point in a service industry like yours, Andrew, where an electrician could go on site just with the iPad and not actually need to engage the consumer at all? And do you think we're at that point, or you think there'll be a hybrid?
Look, I think at this point, it's definitely worthwhile still having the customer engagement. Because we're a very hands-on type service business, sometimes customers visually need to see what we're doing for them. It can be hard to explain to them via a phone call, via a Zoom, via an email. So sometimes visually having them next to you and showing them what you're going to be doing for them, what cable you're running, what hole you're digging, what tap you're changing. It's still very important. It's really, I think, a crucial part of what we do on a day-to-day business. Not to say it won't change in the future, but I think at this present time, it's still pretty important.
Thank you. And Andrea, finally, from your perspective, 2 or 3 focus areas that you think are going to be important sort of looking forward 6 months?
Oh, definitely what we're going to be doing with Ayla is we're rebranding. We're trying to freshen up our whole image because we thought it was getting a little bit stale. What we did do in July this year is that we reset our membership. So we went from $260 for a member down to $50 for industry. And that's something that we got a really, really good reaction to, because we know that I was talking to people where they're still employed, but their partners lost their job. So we're very mindful of that, a lot of people's free spending had ceased. So we're definitely looking at that. I love all the talk about the digitisation. And the one thing that I always think about, especially with everyone working from home, which is fine, it's great, I love it, is does that open us up to Australian jobs being jeopardised because we can get people from Israel, we can get people from London to do work because we're all working remotely. It doesn't really matter where we work and who we hire. Is that something that COVID will open up to us that might be a challenge where we actually will lose talent from Australia doing different jobs and organisations? Hopefully not for our industries, but it's something that I think about all the time.
John mentioned Bernard Salt earlier, and one of the things he looks at it from an Australian perspective, because we're an island, there's probably every opportunity that there's going to be a whole host of new entrepreneurial opportunities and industries created here because we may become somewhat more self-dependent. But you're right, equally on the flip side, maybe from a professional services perspective, it'll be fascinating to see. Now, I'm conscious of time. We, as is classic with the James Ciuffetelli panel session, I said an hour, we should have 4. You guys have been fabulous. There's one question that I'm going to ask each of you to close, and then we're going to close off the session. And just a quick one, a plug for you at Telstra. Lots of questions coming through around contact tracing, John, and whether you might be able to give some of the local and federal governments a hand with contract tracing. But let's not talk politics on this call. One last question. Is this the new normal? Are we in the future, or do you think we're nowhere near that yet? Andrea?
Don't know. And as a very wise leader said to me most recently, it is okay not to know. The unknown is okay. We didn't know about COVID in Feb, March, and look how well we've done. So continue just adopting what you're doing and keep moving forward. It's okay not to know.
I love it. Andrew?
Look, I think we are in the future. My personal opinion, I think as a country, we've done really well to kind of manage this compared to the rest of the world. So as long as everyone has understood what their requirements are moving forward, I think we'll do really well going into 2021.
We're there. Good. And John, finally.
I'm going to have a middle of the road answer, which is I think we're going to take the best of the shifts that have occurred during COVID, like a lot of these digital tools and so forth. But I think we're all going to go back to a lot more of the human interactions. And so I actually think going forward, back to your point earlier, Andrea, around just running events, we ran a virtual event as well, had some advantages. We got some great international speakers, but we didn't have the human element. I think going forward, it'll be a hybrid event of human interaction augmented with technology. So I think we're going to move forward, but in that regard of going back to the human element, I just can't see us not going back to that sort of human interaction. We're just humans at the end of the day.
I think for finding that middle ground from a people perspective, Evan just wrote up a question which actually says, how do you actually find the middle ground to keep people connected, right? Because many of us actually have enjoyed re-immersing ourselves. I know I've had more dinners with my children and my wife in the last 6 months than I probably had in 20 years prior. So you look at that aspect and that's positive, but then I miss my colleagues, from a professional perspective. So finding that balance and whether technology can actually help us do that in part of the way will be interesting. I want to thank the 3 of you and everybody who's come on board. So John and Andrew, thank you so much for being fantastic panelists, for giving us your time. For everyone who's jumped on the line, really, really appreciate it. But from the whole Whiteark team, I want to thank you all and have a great day, stay safe, and enjoy the fact that Melbourne has reopened and Richmond are the premiers.